Welcome. I'm Erik Fleming, host of A Moment with Erik Fleming, the podcast of our time. I want to personally thank you for listening to the podcast. If you like what you're hearing, then I need you to do a few things. First, I need subscribers. I'm on Patreon at patreon.com/A Moment with Erik Fleming. Your subscription allows an independent podcaster like me the freedom to speak truth to power and to expand and improve the show. Second, leave a 5-star review for the podcast on the streaming service you listen to it. That will help the podcast tremendously. Third, go to the website, momenterik.com. There you can subscribe to the podcast, leave reviews and comments, listen to past episodes, and even learn a little bit about your host. Lastly, don't keep this a secret like it's your own personal guilty pleasure. Tell someone else about the podcast. Encourage others to listen to the podcast and share the podcast on your social media platforms because it is time to make this moment a movement. Thanks in advance for supporting the podcast of our time. I hope you enjoy this episode as well.
The following program is hosted by the NVG Podcast Network.
Hello, and welcome to another Moment with Erik Fleming. I am your host, Erik Fleming. And so, as this episode drops, I'm hoping that everybody had a good Juneteenth, that you enjoyed the festivities, hopefully that you found some festivities wherever you live, and that you were able to learn some things or just enjoy the culture. But if you didn't get enough of that, one of my guests is Dr. Karlos K. And he is becoming a regular on the podcast. And Dr. Hill's going to talk about the significance of Juneteenth, why it's important, especially in these times that we're in. And then my other guest is a young brother named Justin Carter. Justin is the program manager for this organization called Futures Without Violence. And he's an up-and-coming activist in his own right. He's about to drop a book, so we're going to talk a little bit about that, as well as some other issues that are going on. He's another millennial that I have the honor and privilege to highlight and lift up for the listeners, and another voice that I believe you'll be hearing a lot from down the road. So I'm really glad that I was able to get them on. So speaking about guests, I mentioned that there's going to be some changes, right? Last episode. So one of the changes is already that starting last episode, the commentary part of the podcast is going to be on YouTube. So last week's commentary is the first one that's on there. So, some people will get to see me do the thing, because what I'm going to do is, like, when I record my commentary, I'm going to record that on video and just put that out there. So hopefully, that'll get some more people to pay attention to the podcast and join you all in listening to it. And the other change, you might notice it because it all depends on how things go. But as most of you all who have been listening know, this is not my profession. This is not my regular job. And at my regular job, my position has changed. So that changes the time that I have to interview people. So I've got to reschedule a lot of folks. So hopefully, we can kind of keep everything flowing, right now, the guests that I have lined up within the next 2 or 3 weeks, barring that they can't make it, we should be good to go. But after that, we have to make some changes. So I'm going to be doing that over the next week to get that set up. So a lot of the people that I want to be on can still come on, and we'll go from there. If you want to be a guest, or if you want to donate, a one-time donation, or if you want to subscribe to the podcast, you can do that at www.momenterik.com. If you do that, I will greatly appreciate that. And maybe I'll get enough, because I was trying to push for it. My goal is, if I can get 20,000, and you've heard me say that. And, if I can get 20,000 subscribers, then I won't have to worry about my other job. I could do this full time. And I know that's a lofty goal. So, but you got to set a goal in order to reach it. So that's where that's been my target. So, the more people that subscribe, the better. But I just really appreciate y'all tuning in and listening. And again, if you want to learn more about me and how this podcast came about and all that, then go to www.momenterik.com. All right, enough about that. Let's go ahead and get this program started. And as always, we kick it off with a moment of news with Grace G.
Thanks, Erik. 12 people died when a private single-engine turboprop plane crashed shortly after takeoff near Butler Memorial Airport in Missouri. A U.S. Air Force B-52 bomber crashed on takeoff during a test mission at Edwards Air Force Base in California, killing all 8 people on board. Georgia House Republican leaders postponed redrawing the state's legislative maps during a special session called by Governor Brian Kemp. The U.S. Supreme Court declined to hear a former high school student's First Amendment challenge against an Indiana school district's policy that prohibited her from displaying anti-abortion flyers on school walls. The Trump administration is intervening in a lawsuit to challenge Evanston, Illinois' first-in-the-nation housing reparations program for Black residents. Georgia Republicans selected U.S. Representative Mike Collins to face incumbent Democratic Senator Jon Ossoff in the general election. Rick Jackson won the Republican primary runoff for Georgia governor and will advance to the general election against Democrat Keisha Lance Bottoms. Janice Lewis George won the Democratic mayoral nomination in Washington, D.C., and Robert White secured a decisive victory to win the Democratic nomination for D.C.'s delegate to Congress. Everett West won the Alabama Democratic runoff for the U.S. Senate and will face Republican Barry Moore for the open seat. Nikayla Jasmine Thomas and Jim Priest have advanced to a Democratic runoff election in Oklahoma, with the winner set to face Republican Kevin Hern for the U.S. Senate seat. The U.S. Supreme Court rejected a gun industry challenge to a New York law that allows lawsuits against firearm manufacturers, wholesalers, and dealers for endangering public safety. And former President Barack Obama hosted thousands of attendees at the grand opening of the $850 million multi-use Obama Presidential Center campus in Chicago. I am Grace G., and this has been A Moment of News.
All right. Thank you, Grace, for that moment of news. And now it is time for my guest, Dr. Karlos K. Hill. Karlos K. Hill is a writer, speaker, and community engaged scholar who brings deeper perspective to historical racism. Dr. Hill works with students, leaders, and communities to understand our collective past and heal in relation to our most traumatic histories. Dr. Hill is Regents Professor of the Clara Luper Department of African and African American Studies at the University of Oklahoma. Dr. Hill is the author of 3 books: Beyond the Rope, The Impact of Lynching on Black Culture and Memory, The Murder of Emmett Till, A Graphic History, and the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre, A Photographic History. Dr. Hill founded the Tulsa Race Massacre Oklahoma Teachers Institute to support teaching the history of the race massacre to thousands of middle school and high school students. He also serves on the boards of the Freedom Center Planning Committee, the Clara Lupa Legacy Committee, and the Board of Scholars for Facing History and Ourselves, and is actively engaged on other community initiatives working toward racial justice. And it is always a pleasure and an honor to talk to this brother and for him to be on this podcast. So without further ado, it is my distinct honor and privilege to have as a guest again on this podcast, Dr. Karlos K. Hill. All right, Dr. Karlos K. Hill. How you doing, brother? You doing good?
You know, I'm always in good spirits when I'm able to be on your show and to share whatever knowledge I have with you and your audience. So I'm in good spirits on the cusp of Juneteenth remembrance. So thank you for asking.
Yes, sir. Well, happy Juneteenth to you. By the time this will air, the holiday would have passed, but I couldn't have this holiday go without getting some knowledge from you about the holiday and all that. So, I start off with a quote that I want you to respond to. So this is the quote: "None of us are free until we're all free."
That's music to my ears. That is Ubuntu in action. That is Ubuntu made concrete. Ubuntu, for those in your audience who may be unfamiliar, is a Zulu sort of phrase that means I am because we are. I am because we are. It is profound African wisdom, but it's also a theory of humanity, right? And as a theory of humanity, what Ubuntu really is about is my humanity, my freedom is bound up in your freedom. My unfreedom is bound up in your unfreedom, right? Our lives, as distinct and different as they may be, are interconnected. And so when you have that kind of understanding of the world, right, those kinds of statements make a lot of sense. To the extent that you don't have that view of the world, those statements strike one as kind of cute or kind of sort of aspirational, right? But it in no way tells us who we really are in relationship to each other, right? That's something that maybe idealistic people believe, or that's optimistic people believe that. That's not really how it is. Ubuntu says not only is that the way we should understand our humanity, Ubuntu tells us that our humanity, or excuse me, our humanity, right, is rooted in each other, right? There is no other, right? We are human beings because we've come to treat each other with humanity. That is what it means to be human, to treat others with humanity. That is profound. That's not just wisdom, that is profound reordering of how we relate to each other as human beings. And so that quote only makes sense to me, right, through the lens of Ubuntu, right? And so that is a powerful word, Brother Fleming.
Yeah, that was, a lot of us have said that, but the credit for this one goes to Opal Lee, which I think is appropriate because she's considered the grandmother of the holiday we're going to discuss. So, Dr. Karlos K. Hill, what is Juneteenth, and why is it important to celebrate?
Man, that's why I'm in a good mood today, because when I think about Juneteenth, it is Freedom Day. It is Jubilee Day. It is the day in which slavery for Black people who were enslaved in Texas finally came. But it also is a moment where slavery in this country in terms of lived reality came to an end June 19th, 1865. That is Freedom Day. That is the day of Jubilee for some of the last enslaved people in the United States to gain freedom truly, for the shackles of slavery to be removed and for them to move into a new phase, right? The phase of being free people, right? That is what Juneteenth represents. It is the hopes and dreams of millions of enslaved people coming true, that one day they would be free. For 246 years before that, slavery was a nightmare, right? Slavery, according to the United Nations, their most recent sort of discussion of the impact of the slave trade and slavery, talked about slavery as the gravest crime against humanity in world history. It is the darkest hour, not just in our country, but in world history. And on Juneteenth, 1865, that horror came to an end. That nightmare came to an end. And so because of that, it is a jubilee. It is Freedom Day, freedom that many thought would never come about. Because for 246 years preceding that, freedom had been denied. And it took a 4-year civil war, the bloodiest war still in American history, to break the shackles of slavery. And so Juneteenth is a moment where we remember, where enslaved people, in fact, remembered that 246 years that preceded it, the suffering that preceded it, the contributions that they had made to the United States society that has never been acknowledged. Juneteenth became that moment of freedom, but also reflection on how we as a people, right, have gotten here in the first place. And so Juneteenth, for all those reasons, is sacred, right? It's a sacred observance. And, for me, it is not just an important moment to remember, right? It's very personal to me. I am someone who is a descendant of enslaved people. Juneteenth has given me the opportunity to bear witness to their sufferings, to their sacrifices, to their contributions, my enslaved ancestors. Speaking of Ubuntu, I am because I am not here if it were not for the resilience and endurance of my enslaved ancestors. I am not here. I am only because they were. And so Juneteenth, as a grassroots holiday that existed for 157 years before it became a federal holiday, has done that work for us, has grounded us in the memory of our ancestors as descendants of enslaved people. And so Juneteenth, for me, is a profound reckoning with my own enslaved past. And it is a moment where I can not just remember, but have deep gratitude for what my enslaved ancestors, Annie Pilot, went through, and and her mother, Myra Kamel, who were enslaved people in the Alabama Black Belt during the 1830s, 40s, and 50s. And so for me, it is a moment to honor and to have deep gratitude to my enslaved ancestors and what they gave to me as an inheritance so that I could live in these United States. Not just live, but live with deep pride for where I come from. That is what Juneteenth for me really is about. It is a sacred moment for me to pay my respects, to pay gratitude to ancestors who never experienced freedom, but paved the way for me to. because of their sacrifices. For me, at the deepest level, Juneteenth is about bearing witness to that.
Yeah. So how do you respond to people who say that this holiday is unnecessary?
I am irritated with people who are ignorant and or indifferent to Juneteenth as a sacred observance. I would try to begin a conversation with someone who's opposed to Juneteenth as an observance, a national observance, by saying to them very clearly, slavery is the most important institution in our nation's history. When you discount Juneteenth, you discount that. Slavery was so important to our history that slavery is older than even the American constitutional republic. Slavery existed for 246 years, chattel slavery by law and practice. 1619, when the first enslaved people arrived to the shores of Virginia. June 19, 1865, when the last enslaved people are freed in Galveston. Slavery defined American life, so much so that on the eve of the Civil War, enslaved people accounted for 50% of the nation's wealth. If you are indifferent to Juneteenth, you're indifferent to the nation's history and the importance of slavery to it. Our nation is only 237 years old. If we consider the founding 1789, when we ratify 1788, 1789, when we ratify the Constitution. And so if we take that as our founding date, that's 237 years of history as a nation versus 246 as a nation in which slavery was its founding institution, most important institution. So to deny Juneteenth is to deny our very history, to be ignorant of our very history. And so it is, if we don't want to truly understand our history, we can be indifferent to Juneteenth. But if we truly want to have an authentic understanding of our history, Juneteenth is important to our nation, right? Because it is the one moment in our sort of national remembrance, sort of, it's the one moment in our nation, particularly since June of 2021, when it became a national observance, is the one moment where we talk about, think about, reflect on the history of slavery. Juneteenth plays a really important role in educating us and hopefully creating compassion around the history of its slavery and the enslaved. It's really, really important because there are very few national, and in fact, I would say there is no national memorial to the history of slavery or the enslaved that has been created by our government. So we're 157 years later, and there's still no memorial to enslaved people, national memorial created by the United States government, honor enslaved people. 157 years later, Juneteenth, as a grassroots observance amongst enslaved people initially, but ultimately the descendants of those enslaved people have tried to, at a grassroots level, remember the significance and importance of enslavement to this country, honor the sacrifices and the sufferings of enslaved people, all with an eye toward how, the understanding and being grounded in the history of slavery could help us fight the current day struggles, or the struggles of the day. And so Juneteenth has had to do all that work all by itself because the void created by a national government and a society that has been unwilling to be honest about the true significance of slavery and certainly the nightmare that slavery was for enslaved people. All of that, Juneteenth has bore the weight of that for 157 years. And only since 2021 have we as a nation began to inch closer to acknowledging that. I think until we actually have a national memorial monument created by the United States government, we will continue to have these kinds of conversations about, well, some people don't believe that it's important. A true national monument or memorial to enslaved people that centered them in their experience would, I think, go a long way of addressing that because of the dialogues, because of the honest conversations that would be necessary for that memorial to be created. That is where the change and transformation, I think, would at least begin. And hopefully from there, honest conversations about how the history of slavery show up today. Like if we can get to the place of saying it's significant, it's mattered to our nation's history, the next step is to talk about how that history shows up today, since we have given it its significance and import. Right? It's a 1-2 punch. But because we have ultimately refused as a nation to deal with the enormity of enslavement, the horrors, the nightmare that it was for enslaved people, and how that intergenerational trauma shows up today in the form of legacies, we have commentary like what you mentioned. It is a symptom of our relationship. It's not an aberration. And so for me as a historian of lynching and racial violence inclusive of slavery, because of those kinds of understandings, it has mattered to me to position people to not just know, but to know to care. That is the thing that a national memorial, I think, would help to cure, go a long way to cure that that ignorance and indifference. So that is truly my call to action in this year's, for this year's Juneteenth, is that, yes, we have, as a nation, we have ultimately, after 150 plus years, decided to elevate it to a national observance. That's a big step for us as a country, but that's not the only step. That's one of many steps that we need to take to address, and authentically account for the impact that slavery had on our society and continues to have on.
Well, that sounds like a project. That sounds like something we need to have some further discussion about, Doc, about the memorial. And then two, it really was leading into my next question. So I'm going to rephrase the question instead of the way I originally wrote it, because you talked about the importance. But in this climate, right, the Trump administration just announced that it is challenging Evanston, Illinois' reparation programs for Black residents. And the Department of Defense is still removing photos and artifacts relating to Black soldiers. So how can we stress the importance strategically in this climate?
I mean, I think that, I'm certainly, Brother Fleming, I love your question because you've elevated me beyond the historian to a strategist. I am certainly not a strategist. And I think that's something that I'm slightly proud about, in the sense that it has given me a clear voice to speak the truths of slavery without worrying about whether it's strategic or whether it's going to land well or whether it's going to ultimately help me achieve my aim. My aim, honestly, given the climate that we're in, is not to create change. I don't think change in this climate is truly possible, right? But we can, and this is where I come in as an educator, not a strategist. I can seed. I'm a seed sower. I am seeding the kind of knowledge and hopefully compassionate relationship to these histories in my classroom, in conversations with people like you, brilliant people like you, as well as audiences that I have the opportunity to engage with. It's me seeding these ideas, and in seeding these ideas, creating room for the true strategists, the true strategists who know how to navigate and maneuver within the kind of political climate that we're in, that is truly hostile, not only hostile to, right? There is hostility, but truly there is a memory rebellion underway in our country. A rebellion rooted in erasing not just the history of slavery, but all histories that would seemingly um, present a picture of America that is that is that that is counter to a narrative that America is the greatest country in the world that has ever existed and ever will exist. Anything that undercuts, this idea that America is great and a country that is exceptional in world history is not allowed. And if any of the audience has sort of followed the kind of narrative construction of America, uh, you know, as it relates to the America 250 commemorations, America is a great country that never that that never institutionalized chattel slavery. That's not a line anywhere. Slavery's gone. Okay, we're not dealing with that. We're not going to deal with the era of lynching that came after enslavement. We're not going to talk about Jim Crow. Right? Those are not just narrative choices because of space or those are true choices because eliminating those stories, eliminating those experiences allows us today to say that we are good. To the extent that we highlight those experiences and talk about the legacies of that experience, now we got a conversation for today. America ain't looking as great as we say it is. And so that, I think, is a true there's a true memory rebellion underfoot. As a educator, I have deepened my teaching in this climate, but I would be, you know, mm, I think for me, strategizing about how to navigate and maneuver at this moment exceedingly hard if you're trying to tell what Ida B. Wells would say, the threadbare truth. If you're trying to tell that story, it's hard to negotiate it, navigate a climate that is erasing that actively. I think this is just truly, for me, a moment of truth telling. And that um, is something that is above and beyond sort of strategy, just trying to tell the truth and let the power of that truth sit in rooms, sit in hearts and minds, and let it see the activist work that I think what you're pointing to, the activist work that could bring it about, the activist work that could really change the tide. I'm really just trying to sow the seeds that can be that hopefully will take root in people and then make it easier for activists who are really doing the amazing work. And probably my greatest asset in this work is I'm deeply connected to the activist community, fighting for repair, for historic racial violence. They have taught me, strategy, but I would say that I'm still not a strategist. But that would be how I approach it in particular, dear brother.
Well, you're smart, far smarter than me, but I would push back in the sense that sowing seeds is strategic, right? Because a farmer,
Yes.
a farmer is not just going to throw the seeds anywhere. They're going to deliberately pick fertile ground in order to sow those seeds so they can be able to get the harvest down the road, right?
Mm.
So your fertile ground is Oklahoma University where you teach at, right?
Yes.
That's where you're sowing those seeds. That's where you're planting. The state of Oklahoma, I would even give you latitude for in sowing those seeds. So it's like, don't sell yourself short, brother. You're part of the strategy. You just a farmer. We trying to get people to buy the product once it's harvested.
Yes.
Yes. But yeah, don't sell yourself short.
Well, thank you for giving me a promotion. I appreciate it. I'm looking for a higher wage now.
Before Juneteenth, did you have a problem as a Black historian celebrating the 4th of July?
It really depends on what we're celebrating and what we're talking about in relationship to the 4th of July. The 4th of July is a moment where, our nation, which wasn't a nation at that point, July 4th, 1776, it was a moment when American colonists declared their independence, declared their freedom from Great Britain, the greatest power in the world at that time. That is what July 4th, 1776 stands for, right? A declaration of independence, a declaration of freedom from. At that same time, there were enslaved Africans throughout the 13 colonies that would become the United States. 13 years later, 1789, when the United States becomes a formal constitutional republic, slavery is enshrined in the Constitution. And it's enshrined in several ways. The 3/5 clause that basically describes enslaved people as 3/5 a person, as well as fugitive slave laws, clauses within the Constitution that made it easy to re-enslave people who have absconded from slavery. And finally, clauses within the Constitution allowing for the importation of enslaved Africans into our country for 20 years after the founding. In those three ways, our nation between 1776, 1789 enshrined slavery in American life. So for me as a righteous Black man to be celebrating the 4th of July, given that history, that is deeply problematic. Right? July 4th, if I'm going to center enslaved people, if I'm going to center their experience, it has to take the tack of a more Frederick Douglassian understanding of July 4th. And Douglass famously in July of 1857 says to America, what is the 4th of July to the slave? What is the 4th of July to the slave? That is the energy I think that is required in remembering the 4th of July, not freedom as something that was gained by all, but a moment where some American colonists gained freedom, but at the same time, thousands and ultimately millions of Black people would be enslaved because of that moment and what came after. We have to think about the 4th of July and our relationship to it, not a kind of general, abstract sort of celebration of something that didn't really bring freedom, or at least, freedom in the ways that we would understand it, right, to all Americans. And so I think the 4th of July, and especially America 250, given how it is being framed, is a moment where we cannot just celebrate the 4th of July as this great moment. It's a moment where the conversation about freedom for all of its citizens began, but certainly freedom was denied in those two critical moments, 1776, 1789, to enslaved people. We need to center that and remember that in addition to the founding of the American Republic. And so for me, critical memory is required, and like a Douglasonian understanding is required for understanding the 4th of July, because it forces us to center the experiences of enslaved people. And in 4th of July commemorations that I have been a part of and seen, within the U.S., that is never reflected upon.
So, to paraphrase the Apostle Paul, when I was a child, I thought as a child, right?
Mm.
And so, for me, when I was younger, the 4th of July was a big deal. And I've always acknowledged it and celebrated. As I became older and more conscious of history and the connections and all that stuff, what you say, the Douglasonian mindset kicked in. But my reconciliation was spiritual. And it just real quick, because I got one more question for you. But to me, it was spiritual because, in the Black church, when we see something that that God had a hand in, we say, look at God, right?
Yes.
and where I get it from is that Thomas Jefferson, who was a slave holder, wrote the words and put it on paper and said that all men are created equal and that they all have certain inalienable rights. And I said, here is a slaveholder writing the words that gave us the tool to fight for that freedom and to hold the nation that we're supposed to be celebrating accountable. That's the creed that Dr. King talked about that we have to honor. And so for me, it's a moment not only of celebrating the independence from the British Empire, but it's a moment of accountability. It's a reminder that we have an obligation to make sure to go back to the original quote and understand that if I ain't free, ain't nobody else free, right? And so that's the way I've looked at it as an adult and as somebody that has been in the system as an elected official and all that to get us to that point. And Frederick Douglass couldn't have come to that conclusion that I came to because slavery still existed. But for me, generations later, to come forward and to be an activist and all that, that's where I come from. But I definitely, I wanted to pick your brain as a historian because I know you put deep thought in everything. And I just wanted to get your point.
Yes, sir.
Last question. Besides the acknowledgement of holidays like Juneteenth and celebrations like Kwanzaa, what would you like to see Americans do to respect Black history and culture?
Stop attacking it. Let's start with that, dear brother. Stop attacking it. Stop banning it. Stop polarizing it. Stop making it a history that Americans believe is unimportant. That would be an amazing start. Supporting Black studies programs, supporting diversity, equity, inclusion. These are insufficient, but they are also very important in the current ecosystem of American corporations, American higher education. They really do create transformation in terms of what those institutions look like and what students, those institutions, how they serve those students. And having a Black Studies department on a campus like the University of Oklahoma, very, very important. Talking about seed sowing, right? A campus with 30,000 students that has the ability to take Black studies courses and learn the history of slavery that they won't learn anywhere else. Really, really important to making sure that people come to understand these histories in not just a deeper way, but in a way that that arose that deep indifference and that lack of compassion, not just for the enslaved, but how their descendants and how the history shows up today. I think this war on memory, this war on Black studies and the history of racialized groups in America, particularly people of color, right? That rebellion to come to an end, we have to bring it. It's not going to come to an end. We got to bring it to an end. But that would go a long way to changing the kind of temperature that we have in relationship to these quote unquote polarizing histories. Ultimately, dear brother, if I'm to get sort of spiritual as well, and at the deepest level as well, I think our country has to have a healing relationship with this path. And what I'm about to say, I think, is somewhat controversial and maybe even simplistic, but I think given what I've said, it makes sense. And so I spent the last 2 weeks in Germany, and I spent 2 weeks in Germany for the last 5 years as a part of a Berlin fellowship that introduces American remembrance activists to the history of the Holocaust and National Socialism in Germany. The Berlin Fellowship remembrance tours that we take visit sites connected to the Holocaust. And without going into detail about the Holocaust, right, it represents the murder of 6 million European Jews, right? Nazis and their National Socialism. And so Germany as a state, as a national government, has memorialized and commemorated that genocide, that attempted genocide, that Holocaust, the Shoah. It has memorialized it. It wasn't an easy process, but it happened. That has helped to create tremendous healing amongst Germans and who were responsible, as well as their descendants. It created space to truly have conversations with Jewish people and their descendants about what repair was needed, because the country had developed the ability to talk about the history honestly and to commemorate that history honestly. It created the path for repair to the community that was most impacted by the harm. In our country, we have not come together as a nation to create a national monument, a national memorial. We have refused to do so. And in refusing to do so, we have precluded healing from this most horrific history. United Nations, earlier this year, slavery and the slave trade, gravest crime against humanity. Gravest crime in human history. And we think we don't need to heal in relationship to. Imagine the arrogance of believing we don't have to heal in relationship to the gravest crime against humanity in our history. The Germans did for their country, the Holocaust, and that's still a country. It's the 4th largest economy in the world. They're doing just fine. The largest economy in the world believes that it's too polarizing, that it would destroy our country somehow. The unity, the national unity. Maybe the healing could bring us together. And so for me, the memorial isn't just something that needs to take place. It's a process that needs to take place. The dialogues, the discussions that would produce the memorial is where the healing is. It's not after the fact, it's during the fact. And that work that we refuse to do is, I think, why we are stuck where we are, and why other countries and other societies that have had these kinds of, regimes of violence, they have not, I never say they have healed. I can only speak of a healing relationship. But I can say Germany, even with its current moment of sort of a rise of the AFD and ultra-right conservatism, even with that, because of what they've done previously, they have a healing relationship. It doesn't make it perfect, but it's a healing relationship because so much has been acknowledged that they don't have these conversations about this history is not important. Yeah, it is. We know it is. Go to the Memorial for Murdered Jews of Europe. Go to the Topography of Terror. Go to the House of Wannsee. Go to all these sites that in one way or another, the government has funded and supported to tell that story. Germans cannot ignore this history. There may be future, attacks similar to what's happening in the United States that tries to remove this, but in this moment, right here, right now, those truths cannot be about National Socialism and the Holocaust cannot be denied. We can't say the same in this country. And so, for me, that is the profound work that happens as a process in creating a memorial. And for me, that is the only way that we begin to have that healing relationship as a country that is necessary for us today.
All right, Doc, I know you got to go, but if people want to reach out to you and follow up on what you just said or anything else, how can they do that?
As I always tell you, dear brother, I'm easy to find. Please reach out to me on karloskhill.com. That's my website. If you just click on the contact button, there is a email form that you can just fill out and just connect with me that way. But I'm happy to receive, phone calls, text messages, whatever, because I really want to be engaged and stay engaged in conversations like we're having together today.
Well, brother, again, thank you so much. You know the rules, so I'll just say, I look forward to our next conversation.
There will be a next conversation. So thank you, dear brother, always for sharing your platform with me and really, truly giving me the space to talk through these really complicated and really difficult histories. You have provided so much space for me to articulate things that just don't get articulated. And so I'm forever grateful for your show, but also for your witness. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
All right, guys, and we're going to catch y'all on the other side. All right, and we are back. And so now it is time for my next guest, Justin Carter. Justin Carter is a public affairs and violence prevention leader, author, and national speaker whose work focuses on translating complex social issues into language that connects, challenges, and moves people toward action. Currently serves as a program manager at Futures Without Violence, where he supports organizations across the country working to prevent violence and promote safety, wellness, and accountability for children, youth, and communities. Justin is the author of the forthcoming book Translation, From Bigotry to Justice, which explores how language, systems, and culture shape harm and healing, and how staying faithful to truth can open pathways toward justice. Drawing from lived experience, professional practice, and philosophy, his work centers on empathy, cultural fluency, masculinity, and the power of conversation to shift norms and behaviors. Whether working with national organizations, college campuses, or community leaders, Justin brings a grounded, accessible approach that blends honesty, reflection, and strategy. His work invites people to think differently about the world they live in and their role in shaping what comes next. Host note, Justin joined the podcast in his individual capacity. The views expressed are his own and do not represent Futures Without Violence. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor and privilege to have as a guest of this podcast, Justin Carter. All right, Justin Carter. How you doing, brother? You doing good?
I'm doing well, Eric. How are you doing?
Doing fine. This episode's going to air after Juneteenth. You got any big plans for the holiday?
Yeah, I'm going to go see some family in Toledo, Ohio. So we got a nice little family reunion going on. Juneteenth celebration. I think I got some cousins that's in the parade. So it's going to be a good time.
They got a parade in Toledo, Ohio. Boy, we moving up in the world.
I know, right?
They just started. I think Atlanta's going to have one. That's where I am in the Atlanta area. They're going to have one Saturday.
Okay.
So that should be interesting because I think it's the first one that they've done. So
Oh, yeah.
this whole thing is just evolving. And Toledo, Ohio, so that explains the Ohio State connection.
Yes, sir. Yep. Went to Ohio State for undergrad.
Yeah, yeah. And then you ended up going to University of Texas, which is kind of like, I don't know where your loyalties lie now. I don't know if you're a
Yeah.
SEC guy or a Big Ten guy, but
Yeah, I'm 100% Scarlet and Gray. The Ohio State was my dream school since I was in fifth grade, and I was able to go there. So I will forever be a Buckeye. All kudos to the Longhorns. I love Texas. I love my time at Texas, but I could never not be a Buckeye. So that's how I feel about it.
I understand. Well, you can't knock a school like Texas that's on Martin Luther King Drive.
That is true.
Bro, let me tell you something real quick. And this is kind of normal for me, but I got to tell you this story because you can relate. So when I used to travel a lot, if I saw a sign that said MLK Drive, I said, all right, that's the hood. All right, good. I get off. If I want to get some good food or something like that, all right, that exit right there, we need to go. Got to Austin, Texas, man, got off of Martin Luther King. They said, well, we got to get off of Martin Luther King. Oh, we're going through the hood before we get to the Capitol? Okay, cool. Because the city in Jackson, the state capitol is in the hood. It's like it's in downtown, but it's like as soon as you look out the corner, it's like you in the hood right there. The Black History Museum is literally like 2 blocks away from the capitol. So it's like, we get up there and I'm like, is that the University of Texas? And I said, oh my God. University of Texas, Martin Luther King Drive. All right. I feel you, Austin. So yeah, you can't knock the school like that.
No, not at all.
So what I normally like to do to start it off is I do a couple of icebreaker exercises. So the first one is a quote I want you to respond to. And the quote is, we are so much more than what has happened to us.
Yeah, I love that quote. There's another quote too I'm drawing a blank on the name, but I'm not sure if you've ever been to Montgomery, Alabama, and the museum that's there. And one of their slogans, and it's on their t-shirts, I got a t-shirt too, and it says, we are more than the worst decisions that we've ever made. And so this really resonates with me because I truly believe in radical forgiveness. I believe that we are so much more than a mistake. We are so much more than just one choice, one thing. We are so much more than being being singled out to just one single aspect of our lives. And so I feel like if we could adopt that across the country or even globally, it could change a lot of systems that we see now, and a lot of opportunities that people who have lost them for years and years could get back one day. That is my hope anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good positive thinking, brother. I wish there were some people in my life that had radical forgiveness, but that's a whole nother podcast, a whole nother day. The next exercise is what I call 20 questions. So I need you to give me a number between 1 and 20.
Okay. Let's go with 18.
All righty. What's one thing we might all agree is important no matter our differences?
I think, man, I've been thinking a lot on this because I've been writing some of this stuff in my book. But I think everyone would agree that we all deserve dignity and humanity, no matter who you are.
Okay. Yeah. That seems pretty basic. I was no, I'm serious. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not trying to minimize it. It's just,
Yeah.
but it just makes sense. It was like I'm getting ready. I'm on my vacation time, and so when I do that, I try to catch up on documentaries, and so dignity and humanity is a big part of the Thomas Jefferson story, especially
Mm-hmm.
as he was drafting the Declaration of Independence. And this was one of the few documentaries that really got into the meat about his original draft as opposed to what we all know now.
Mm-hmm.
And, when he was trying to, the paragraph he had about slavery and they took it out for political reasons. And, it was just the way that he wrote that, you kind of forgot that he was a slaveholder. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because he was really talking about how we just took these people from Africa and he was blaming King George for slavery in America. But I mean, he was just the passion he wrote with it. It was just kind of like, so people were kind of like, okay, but
Yeah.
the dignity and humanity, you could tell he was addressing in that piece, even though he didn't live that lifestyle. What is Futures Without Violence, the organization that you work with?
Yeah, so Futures Without Violence is a national organization, national nonprofit. Well, really, I would even honestly say global because there's a work that we do across the seas as well that's really focused on providing safety, healing for communities across everywhere, honestly. We got our start in domestic violence and serving survivors of those situations, but expanded, understanding that violence is connected through so many different avenues in so many ways. And so we have to start focusing on different aspects of violence as it relates to domestic violence, right? And that can be a part of family violence. It could be potentially gun violence. It could be gang violence. It could be all these different forms of violences that I would say continue to strive to eliminate in our world to really create safety and security for all families, including children which my specific team is a part of, our children and youth team.
Okay. So how did your path lead you to work for Futures?
Yeah, so I've had a long journey in this work. So I actually started this work when I was 19 years old, when I was looking for an internship just to see what it is that I wanted to do in the world. I started wanting to focus on anxiety and depression. And so I did that. I was in a psychology major, and I actually had cousin whose best friend was working at this organization called the Ohio Domestic Violence Network. And so she talked to her, and I then talked to her friend and was like, hey, looking for an internship. Is there a way that can get me in, see what can happen? And so she said, okay, let's start bringing you on board. And so I talked to her and I talked to her supervisor, talked to the staff. And then ultimately it was thought that I didn't have enough experience and I just wasn't ready to be in that line of work, so to speak, which I think is interesting, just knowing that internships is meant for you to learn things. But I digress on that. But anyway, I'm a Virgo through and through. And so if you tell me I couldn't do something, then I'm going to do everything I can to make sure I can do it. So what that meant was I took every single training that there was possible on their website. I was at every training and I learned so much as it relates to not only domestic violence, but just violence in general. And it opened my eyes to a lot of different situations, scenarios, just things that are going out in the world. And it really made me get really interested into the work. And so a year or so later, I met this guy whose name is Tony Porter, and he's pretty influential in the field about men against violence. And he really took me under his wing and said, hey, like, have you ever thought about this thing called men and masculinity? Have you ever thought about this thing called men against violence? And, me, I was like, I don't know what none of that means. So as he was able to like really open my mind and explore, he got me to more trainings, more conferences. I then found my passion and what I wanted to do. And what I've come to know now is just ending violence in general. But at the time, and even still, it's really about being my true authentic self and how do I promote that authenticity through the work that I do. And so I ended up reapplying to be an intern at the Ohio Domestic Violence Network. But instead of hiring me as an intern, they ended up hiring me as staff. And so I became a staff member with them as their engaging men coordinator. And I was doing men's against violence work during that time. And then it was time for me to move to Texas because I was just ready to get out of Ohio. I felt like the work that I had done in Ohio was really, really great. I had really soared in that career in that small bit of time that I was there, working with universities all across the country, all across, well, parts of the country, yes, but also in all parts of Ohio. And so it put me on a stage of, okay, Justin knows what he's talking about. Like there's a voice for him. And so I decided that it was time for me to go. I got my master's degree from the University of Texas at Austin. But at the time, I was there doing suicide prevention and working for our crisis response, which student emergency services, as we were calling it. So I was doing a lot of that work while also being in grad school. And on the side, I was also a consultant as well. So I never left the men's engagement space. I never left the violence prevention space. I was just doing it on the side as a consultant. And that leads me to how I met Futures. I actually met a couple of them because they were hosting something in Montgomery, Alabama, actually. They were hosting kind of like a meetup for different practitioners and folks around the country. And I was able to meet them there. And they were just telling me about Futures. And I had known about Futures in so many different ways, but not directly. I had never spoken to anybody directly. And so once I learned about them and they're like, hey, this thing is coming up. We'd love to see you more, this, that, and the third. And so after I graduated with my master's degree in public policy, I ended up moving to Washington, D.C. And so I was here in DC for a while being a consultant, and I just so happened to see that Futures was hiring. And I was like, wait a minute, this is that same organization that I met when I was in Montgomery. And so I sent an application in, and of course they remembered me, and they were like, oh my goodness, yes, like come, let's talk this, that, and the third. And eventually I ended up getting hired there. So they brought me on as a program manager, and now I do a whole lot of stuff, it feels like. But it's just amazing how connection just comes full circle, because I never would have met them had I not continued to do my consulting, continuing networking out in the field. And the way that I got to that initial meeting is I knew somebody who knew me and said, hey, I think you should invite Justin to this. And that's how I was able to go. And that's how I was able to meet Futures. So, and then 2 years later, here I am connected with them, working on their staff. So yeah, that is my long journey of how I was able to get to Futures. But still in the field, there's so many folks that are connected, and I'm glad that I continue to do the work and folks still recognize who I was and my voice.
Yeah, see, so that there were a couple of valuable lessons in that story. One is never doubt yourself. Go forward, and if you believe that you can do something, don't be afraid to take a chance, get out there and do it. Then the other thing is network with people, right?
Yeah.
Just get out and make yourself known to folks. And, I come from a political background, so you would think that's automatically natural, but there are a lot of folks, man, that don't get it. They just run for office, and it's like, who are you? And
yeah.
we don't do it. You know what I'm saying? It's like, at least somebody just say, oh, I saw you on TV, or I remember you spoke at my church, or something like that. At least do something. You know what I'm saying? So,
Right.
yeah, those are, especially younger folks, so you pay attention to that.
Yeah. Opportunity is everything, for sure.
Yeah. So let me ask you this question, because would you consider yourself Gen Z or a millennial?
I think technically I'm a millennial. I would definitely identify as a millennial, and my birthday is like right at the cutoff for millennial. But a lot of my friends and the folks that I hung out with are older millennials. So that's what I would say. I don't identify as much as Gen Z. I don't even I don't really be on TikTok like that. I'm not quite on Facebook where I see the stuff that came from Instagram, that came from TikTok. I'm on Instagram where the stuff from TikTok came to Instagram. So that's where I'm at right now. So definitely a millennial.
Well, I feel you because I'm like in the older generation of Gen X.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm right on the line with baby boomer. So, it's kind of like, I feel you on the identity thing, but based on my life experience, I was definitely a Gen X kid.
Uh-huh.
So the reason why I asked that, because I had on the last episode a millennial sister that's based here in Atlanta, and I asked her the question, what is the most important issue that your generation is facing that you want leaders to address? So I'll pose that to you.
Yeah, I think at this time, there's just such a divide within our nation and within, I think globally too, but there's just a divide as it relates to one, communication. Another thing is misinformation. And the last thing I would say is truth and trust, right? Like, I think that if we are going to have leaders who are going to take us to a direction that's going to move all of us forward for our benefit, then they need to be honest with us. They need to be truthful about what the situation is, what they can and cannot do. And then lastly, understand that they're going to have to combat misinformation because that is everything that I feel like we're battling in this world, especially on social media. It's just how much misinformation is out there and how it feels like nowadays that people just take truth as just their opinion about something. And there's no like real truth in the world. Everything is just like what you think about it, you know? And to me, that's not the reality of the world that we live in. And our leaders have to understand that. They have to be bounded by some type of universal truth that is a part of that is a part of our world. So yeah, I would say leave with that.
Okay. Do you find in this current era or moment in time that we're in, do you find it a challenge to your work or as an opportunity for your work?
Hmm. It depends on what work you're talking about. Honestly, I think I think it's yes and or well, I'll say this. Two things can be true at the same time, right? Like it is absolutely a hindrance the times that we are on and the work that I do, just with the amount of censorship that is coming from the administration, but also just the public in general about how folks feel about things, the denying of humanity of people. And we've seen that time and time again, especially recently. And that is absolutely the work that I do is to give folks humanities, to show the world that that people have their own humanity and dignity. And you have an opposing side who wants to take that completely away. So that's 100% challenging. Funding is challenging as well, right? Like it's, I think nonprofits, it's hard to be in a space where you get a lot of federal dollars or a lot of funding from folks who get to tell you what to do with the money, right? Even though you are the expert on how do you make a better world. That's challenging because everybody's priorities change, it seems. And so every 4 years, there's a new administration that has different priorities, which changes so many different things on what gets funded and what doesn't get funded, right? So I would definitely say it's a hindrance in that aspect. Although there is a benefit at the same time, right? So I think one of the things that we've done so much in our field, and the field I mean is violence prevention field, is the fact that we have all this academic jargon, all these words that we talk about, all these things that we need to have, uh, all these different committees for this, for that, for this. And it's like, how do we make our language as plain and simple for somebody to understand, right? How do I, if I know somebody's value is safety, how do I make sure that I can tell them about how my program is going to make you safe rather than telling you about all this extra public health knowledge of how this works and how that works, which is important, right? It frames the work that we do and absolutely is needed, but it's not necessary to have a conversation with someone who's on the ground, who wants to start a a community clothing drive because they know there's a couple families in their community that don't have clothes for school, right? We don't need all that information to help them with the clothing drive. And so I think this is a time more than ever where when it relates to censorship to translate our language and to actually say what we mean when we're talking about diversity, inclusion, and all the words that aren't necessarily great words, quote unquote, by certain actors, right? Well, how do we talk about what those words actually mean and do the thing that those words are actually meaning without just saying, hey, we have a diversity statement because we believe in all this, right? Like it's so much more than just a diversity statement, so much more than just these check boxes that everybody seems to have nowadays because it's being targeted and eliminated by certain actors. So, and use your imagination on who those actors are who are paying attention to these certain words and actions or I'd say words and phrases and different quote unquote ideologies that folks are having as it relates to justice or social justice and things like that.
Yeah. I think, I use an analogy a lot about a person that runs hurdles, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like you see them, you know that you've got to go over these hurdles to get to that finish line. And, it's like you see that's a challenge, but at the same time, you've got an opportunity to be the best hurdler at that particular moment. And
Mm-hmm.
the key is to execute your plan and do what you got to do to get over it. And I just think, it just makes sense, where people that are successful, you know, understand that challenges are out there, but then always look at it as an opportunity to showcase and do what you do. And so,
Yeah.
so I definitely relate to what you were saying on that. What shapes harm and healing more, language, systems, or culture?
You said harm or healing?
Harm and healing.
Oh, harm and healing. What shapes it more?
Mm-hmm.
So here's the thing. I think, I don't know, I might be the worst person you interview because I'm going to say yes and all the time. I'm going to say yes and I'm going to say two things can be true because that's what I believe. I think that language shapes our culture. So the language that we use creates a reality and that becomes our culture that we live in. Right. And so, for example, if we live in a culture where we use the language, well, we do live in a culture where we use just language that promotes violence or just violent language in general. Just sit and think about how many times you've heard the words, go break a leg, or they threw me under the bus, or you're kicking me in the head with this, right? So if we're using these terms and these words, then if we see it on TV, then it becomes a less sensitized, right? Because we're already using it in our language. And then eventually, if we see it in real life, or if we hear about something that is being impacted by violence in so many ways, again, it's less sensitized to us because we're still using it in our language. It's the same thing when we talk about mental health, right? If we talk about suicide, I did suicide prevention for a long time. And we are using the phrases like if something, let's say we get a bad grade on the test and it sucks, right? Listen, I've had some bad grades on some tests and they suck. But in the culture or folks' language that they use is, oh my goodness, I gotta be on this test, I'm gonna off myself. Or this professor isn't talking to me, I'm just gonna drink some bleach. I wish they would drink bleach, right? Like those types of things, although we might think it as joking, it's serious because that becomes the culture where we're desensitized to things like actual folks who might be facing suicide, right? If somebody says, I'm going to off myself at every little inconvenience that they encounter, then how do we know that when something is really, really serious that they encounter in their lives and they do or they are considering suicide, how do we know what is the serious thing, right? And how does our culture know that we need to protect or support this person if we have a culture that just says, yeah, we say this all the time. We don't know who's actually in trouble. We don't know who's actually in trouble. So our language is really shaping the culture that we live in. And it's unfortunate because in that aspect, it's shaping this culture of non-support. And as much as everybody talks about mental health and you need to take care of your mental health, you need to do this, you need to do that, we're not paying attention to the language that we are actually using as it relates to things that are as serious as diagnosed depression, diagnosed anxiety disorder, diagnosed ADHD, right? There's all these different mental health issues that folks are just using casually in our language that, it's hard to know if you're feeling sad or if you're actually depressed, right? We don't know because our culture says that all of that is the same. So that is how it shapes language is definitely the starter, and then it creates the reality that we live in.
Yeah. Yeah. And you trust me, you're not the worst interview,
Okay.
you're making a lot of sense. And so
Okay, good.
I greatly appreciate it. All right. So how do you activate courage?
Yeah. So courage is, man, there is a philosopher who talks about, oh Lord, I'm drawing the blank on their name, but there's a philosopher who basically talks about the action that is two halves or that's in the middle of two extremes, right? So let's say doing something reckless or doing something, how do you say, doing something safe or not doing something at all. Courage is in the middle of that, right? That's how you should think about it. Is you The way that we activate courage is to, number one, know that you want to do the right thing about something or something deserves to have the right thing. I think all of us have a responsibility to make sure that the reality in the world that we all live in is safe and kind and loving for everybody else. And so it takes courage to stand up to things that don't promote those things, right? And so and courage is the reason why I was talking about that philosopher with courage being in the middle of those two extremes, because sometimes in order to have your courage, it causes you to be a real reckless, right? It causes you to be reckless with your relationship if you have to stand up or speak out against something against a superior, right? If a superior made a comment that might sound racist or might sound sexist or might sound whatever it is, it's reckless in a sense of you're speaking up at the time because you don't know what your superior is going to say to you, but it's also being safe in the moment because you're also protecting other people who might be in the room that might be affected by those things. So you're handling your courage and you're saying, hey, I'm going to stand up to this because this isn't promoting human dignity. This isn't promoting love, safety, and community that in the reality or the world that I want to live in. So that's how I would say you would activate it. Anytime you see those things being denied, it needs to be pushed forward.
Yeah. All right. So you have this book or you're working on a book called Translation from Bigotry to Justice, right?
Yes.
When is that coming out?
Fingers crossed this year. I actually just had a meeting with my editor not too long ago, and she's drafting the final manuscript of the edits. So I have some time between now and, or I guess a month now, for a whole month, I would say, to like really put it in a place where it's ready to be published. And so I'm hoping before the end of this year, I would love in an ideal world that it'd be published by my birthday, September 7th. There'd be a big birthday present to me. I will be turning 30 that day. So it would be a great, like, this is what we did at 30, you know? So hopefully that comes out then. So it's written, it's being edited, and it's almost ready to be published.
Yeah, that'd be cool to be a New York Times bestseller at 30 and just like saying, hey,
Wouldn't it?
hey, this is what I did at 30, what you do, right?
Right.
Yeah. So give me a summary as what this book is about.
Yes. So this book is all about how do we carry truth across difference. And so it's the understanding that everybody carries their own truth and that there is a universal truth in this world. And we have to recognize a universal truth to have a conversation with each other to get our truths across from each other. So I know that was a little confusing, but basically the idea is how do we lose our language to talk and communicate and connect with each other that might have different ideas or different thoughts or different opinions, while also speaking what we mean, right? And carrying our truth to somebody that, yeah, that they can use and shape their world and their reality so we can ultimately benefit our society because we're talking to each other rather than talking past each other.
Yeah. So that plays into my rule. I could go ahead and say it now. So once you've been on this show, you have an open invitation to come back.
Okay.
So, that's a perfect excuse. Hey, the book's out. I need a platform. So
Yeah.
if you knew that, just reach out to me. We'll make that happen, brother.
Appreciate that.
So how can people reach out to you? How can people reach out to Futures? Because Futures is a nonprofit. So y'all need some money. How can people get in contact with you or Futures?
Yeah, so they can go. So as it relates to Futures, it's Futures Without Violence. So they can go directly to the website and see all the amazing things that we do there. There's a lot of different services that we give across the country and as well as globally as well. So if folks wanted to have questions or needed support on whatever program or project that they might be working on, Futures is definitely there to support whatever that project might be.
Well, Justin Carter, I greatly appreciate you taking the time to come on the podcast and talk. The one cool thing about this platform, it gives me the opportunity to lift people up. You may not be a national household name now, but you will be as long as you keep down the path and keep doing what you're doing, especially if this book is as successful as I think it will be. But I really, and I'll say this is a personal moment. I think that, it's very important for people like me to show love and support to young folks and to try to, especially in our community, to try to lift them up and to highlight them as much as I can.
Absolutely.
So like I said, it was an honor for me that you accepted the invitation to give me the opportunity to do that. And I wish you much continued success, not only in the work that you're doing, but on some of the projects that you're working on the side. Cause we Black folks, we got to always have something on the side,
Yeah, we got to have a side hustle. No matter what.
Yeah. But thank you again for coming on. I appreciate it, brother.
Yeah, thank you, Eric, for the opportunity for coming on and allow me to use your platform to just talk about the work that's going on, but also to hopefully inspire some change in our world as well, because I'm always for that too.
Yeah. All right, guys, we're going to catch y'all on the other side. All right, and we are back. And so now I want to thank Dr. Karlos K. Hill for giving that insightful, thoughtful history about Juneteenth and the importance of, celebrating our culture and remembering our history. As always, he's become a regular contributor to the podcast, and I greatly, greatly appreciate that. He's a very, very scholarly, deep brother. And ever since, our first interview together, he's really been supportive of the podcast and seems like he enjoys our conversation. So we're definitely going to keep that going. So Dr. Hill, thank you so much for always taking time to do this. And then Justin Carter, that's a young brother y'all going to be seeing down the road, because not everybody that is quote unquote up and coming is just going to jump out there and run for office. Right. But, we've got a lot of up and coming activists. And so been very fortunate the last couple of episodes to be able to highlight some young people that's doing some good work. And I anticipate we'll doing a lot more great work. And as a matter of fact, we're going to try to see that once his book comes out, that we'll get him back on to talk more about the book. But I hope that you enjoyed those interviews with them. All right, so let's get into my thoughts, my rant for this week. And as always, I say I'm trying not to be long with it, but there's some things I need to get off my chest. One is a good thing. The first one, we've got some more Black folks nominated to, well, one of them is nominated. The other one's in a runoff for the United States Senate. As somebody that had the distinction of being a nominee for the United States Senate, I just think, that's a spot of distinction in government that I would love to see. We've managed to get a lot of African Americans in the House of Representatives, but it's few and far between that we get in the United States Senate. It's always below that 12% threshold. So anytime I see Black folks running for the United States Senate, I get excited and I'm hopeful. So the young man that's running in Alabama is Everett West. He's an attorney in Alabama, and he secured a Democratic nomination last week. And there's a young sister in Oklahoma who is in the runoff, but she was the leading vote getter going into the runoff. Her name is Nikila Thomas. And so whenever I didn't get a chance to check and see when the runoff is going to be, I would assume it's going to be pretty close considering, we're only about, I think, 5 months away from the general. So it's probably going to be in July or August, no later than August. So congratulations, Ms. Thomas, on at least getting to the runoff, and hopefully you can finish it on out. Because we had some people, it's a young lady that a lot of you know. She was one of the TV judges, Judge Penny. Her full name is Penny Brown Reynolds, and Judge Penny officially got the nomination to run for Secretary of State here in the state of Georgia. So I want to congratulate her on that. And then there was a couple of episodes ago, I was highlighting people that had been on the show that was running for office, and there was one glaring omission. Prince George, I think that's right, Prince George County Commissioner Walla Blagay. She is running for Congress. And I failed to mention that when I was highlighting people that had been on the show that's running for something this cycle. And so I wanted to give her flowers and wish her well. I don't think Maryland's had their primary yet. I got to double check to make sure, because DC just had theirs. So, Walla, whether you were still running or not, I just wanted to acknowledge the fact that you stepped out there to run for Congress. So it's pretty cool that I've got guests that are out there, having the honor of talking to them on this podcast, and now they're out there running for Congress. And it'd be really cool if she could get on there too and join Dr. Jasmine Clark and some other folks. And DC just had their primary. And so this is the first election in a long time that the citizens of DC had to elect a new mayor and a new delegate to Congress. As you know, DC has a non-voting delegate. They have representation, but they don't have a voice, which is one of the reasons why DC statehood is still an issue we need to have a discussion about and get behind. But this is the first election they've had in a long, long time where both of those seats were up. And so you're going to see some new faces in the DC area in leadership. They still got as of right now, there's still a runoff, I believe. I didn't get a chance to check before I started recording to see if they called it, but the two favorites were in the lead. And then, but they did have somebody went outright for the delegate position, at least the Democratic nomination. And then they've got to go, in the general in November because they have Republican opponents. And this is the first year, I think that they did the ranked choice. So that's why it's taking a while for the DC numbers to come in, because they've got to count all the people, the first place ballots first, and then they got to go back and see who finished, who was the second choice and who was the third, after they eliminate so many people. So that's why they haven't called it yet. And it might end up that it's not going to be a runoff. It might be a winner in that one once, excuse me, once it's all said and done. Anyway, so I just wanted to acknowledge that part. And, Grace kind of told you all the names, but I just wanted to highlight those particular races. But let's get into the things that have kind of pissed me off, right? So the first thing is something that may not have hit your radar yet, but if you're in the Chicago area, you've heard it for sure. And that the city of Evanston, Illinois was the first city in America to do something towards reparations, right? And the way that they set it up was that they created a program to allow Black residents to be able to afford houses in Evanston. And the city gives X amount of dollars and, for that first purchase, either for like a down payment or whatever, cover closing costs, wherever the deal is. But if you're a Black resident and there's certain criteria, if you're a native of Evanston and you're African American, that you qualify for that program. So, and that's been going on for a few years. As a matter of fact, one of the guests I had, Ted Williams, he serves as on the board or the commission, I guess, for the state of Illinois, doing reparations. So he had a lot to do with that. The city council person, it was a young lady, I can't remember her name right off, who introduced it. She's on that same commission with Brother Williams. And so, because it was the first model. And the mayor of Evanston, who was the mayor when this reparations program started, he is on the path to be the next congressman for the 9th District, Illinois. Now, this is the one where he beat the young lady who got arrested, Katie Abdugula, I think her name is. And I know I'm probably butchering her last name, but you've seen her on Instagram and all that. And she's a young lady that got arrested at one of the Illinois detention centers, protesting and all that, the same detention center where they gassed the priest and all those kind of things. But Daniel beat her in the election, in the primary. And so he's on his way to be the next congressman for that district, which is why I think this next thing the thing I'm getting ready to mention is happening. So now the Trump administration, for some reason, has decided that they want to challenge they want to challenge the program that's been out there for a while. As a matter of fact, I think it was out, during his first term. It may not be that old, but it's been around. It's been going on for a while. And so now they decided that they want to intervene in a lawsuit and challenge it and say that it's reverse discrimination. It's like, again, I know there's a lot of Black folks that vote Republican or run as Republican and all that stuff. But it's just getting harder and harder for me to understand why, right? How much disrespect does it take for you not to want to be in proximity of that? Now, if you understand the history of American politics, you understand that Black folks were Republican en masse once voting, they were eligible to vote, and it switched over to the Democratic Party over time. And then, of course, a lot of the Southern Democrats became Republicans, right? And we already had that conversation last week about the Southern influence on American politics. But, when you have a group of people who just continue on a regular basis to just constantly try to disrespect you, it just seems like at some point you ought to say, hey, stop that. If you're in the party and you're Black, you need to tell them, hey, you stepping on toes. That's not the fight you want to get in, and this whole reverse discrimination nonsense. I don't think there's anything in the law that says that people in Evanston that are white can't buy a house. I don't believe that. The majority of the government in Evanston is white that voted for this program. It's not a majority Black city by any stretch of the imagination. And neither is Chicago, believe it or not. But nonetheless, these folks in the Department of Justice decided that Black folks shouldn't get anything, right? And so for all those folks that, been pushing the reparations agenda, it would seem like, I think which side is on your side and which side is not. Now, you can make the arguments that the Democrats have given you lip service. I feel you on that. But they're not taking you to court. And so I need you, to acknowledge that and understand who is on your side and who ain't. There's, with this action that the Trump administration is taking to stop the very first reparations program, government sanctioned program in the country that's been going on for a while. They've decided in an election year that they want to shut it down. They won't be successful, I don't think. If it gets all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, God only knows. Which, by the way, start paying attention this week because the Supreme Court is going to start rolling out some decisions. They actually kind of started last week. But yeah, I think it's pretty clear if you are an advocate for reparations, what side you need to be on. And I'll just leave it at that. Because, a lot of folks, well, we ain't voting for anybody. No, bruh. If you don't vote for anybody, then you have no leverage to push for the issue. And since it seemed like y'all are having trouble picking a side, the Trump administration has picked a side for you. So if y'all serious about it, then that needs to be reflected in the vote. That's all I'm saying. Don't sit there and say, well, Democrats hadn't. Bruh, again, the Democrats are not suing to stop the only program that's out there that's actually been helping some Black people. Do we want to have more? Of course we do. Anyway, so I'm going to leave it there on that one. I just get tired of people trying to find an excuse to be apathetic, and leaning on an issue as a crutch instead of manning and womaning up and picking a side. And then once you pick that side, hold that side accountable. Excuse me. I mean, that's how we do that in the political game. So just thought I'd throw that out there. Now, this whole thing, let me tell you about this guy, right? So I didn't watch the spectacle at the White House, the Freedom 250 UFC fight. I didn't watch that. Some people say, well, I don't have Paramount Plus anyway, so I couldn't watch it, and that's fine. I have Paramount Plus because there's some shows I like, and that's on there. But I didn't, so I could have watched it, and I didn't. Because I'm not that big of a UFC guy. See, I'm a boxing guy. Let's duke it out with our hands. You ain't got to grab me or kick me or anything like that. That's just, I could go to a bar and see that for free. At least when I was younger, for sure. I don't want to pay to see that. In my role in law enforcement, I've had to do security at UFC events. And, the undercards are just flat out terrible because these are not the top of the line. And they have so many fights lined up that, you're there for like 3-4 hours, by the time the main event happens. So, since this was set up for TV and, it was on the White House, it was a very short card, from what I understand. But, I'm not that big of a fan, but that's okay, because I can say that during my legislative tenure, I'm one of the reasons why it's legal, because all of us that was in the legislature 20-some years ago were debating whether we were going to allow these mixed martial arts fights to even exist, because all the states, especially the states that have boxing commissions, which I think every state does, we had to give those commissions the authority to legalize the fights. Because prior to that, people were just doing it and there was no regulation, as far as, medical conditions and all that stuff. And so you gotta have some regulation with those kind of combat sports. And so those of us that were in the state legislature during that time, you can thank us for legalizing it, even if we're not big fans, right? So anyway, nobody has talked about the fights since the event happened. Usually when you have a UFC fight, especially if you got some high profile people or, undefeated people in there, people talk about, oh, but, they're still undefeated. And, he finished him in an arm bar and all that. And, it was nobody was talking about that. All they were talking about was this guy named Josh Hockett. And I guess I'm saying his name right. I don't really care, because I'm not going to get in a fight with him, because, if he wants to start something with me, I'm gonna use my Second Amendment right on him. I mean, his hands, his feet are weapons. And so it's like, yeah, so I'm not trained in that. So I am trained in my Second Amendment right. So, I'll just leave it at that. But, he decided. Now, here's this guy. Now, he's ranked number 5 in the heavyweight division in UFC. So he's one of the top guys, right? And he's undefeated. So you would think he won his fight. So you would think that would be what we were talking about, if we were going to talk about it from a truly sports angle. But no, he decides he wants to get up there. And then now this is after he puked at the weigh-in at the Lincoln Memorial, which is why it was a bad idea to do the weigh-in at a national monument like the Lincoln Memorial anyway. Because Josh is the reason why people didn't want this event to happen at the White House, right? He puked at the weigh-in at the Lincoln Memorial. So I guess he figured he needed to do something else to get attention. Not just win the fight and stay undefeated and stay ranked number 5 in his weight division. That wasn't enough. Then he had to turn around and call the former First Lady, my homegirl, Michelle Obama, a man. Now, this is not the first time he's done that. He did it in 2022 in a public event. He said that. And he's one of them people, if you on social media and all that stuff, whatever chat room UFC fighters go to, he's basically the UFC version of Nancy Mace, right? He doesn't like transgender people, and he has said before, he all those tin hat right-wing conspiracy stuff, he's down with that. He's that dude. And, some people are trying to say he's Latino. I think he's more AAPI. Doesn't matter. He's an asshole. That's what he is. That's his nationality. right? And, I just think people like that need the Ernie Terrell treatment. What do I mean by that? So, for those of you who are true boxing fans, especially if you're from Chicago, there was this young heavyweight fighter named Ernie Terrell, and he was considered up and coming and all that. But at the same time, there was a young man who had just won the heavyweight title, initially as Cassius Clay. We now know him as Muhammad Ali, as he changed his name after he won the title. So Terrell was like either his first or second, well, it had to be at least his second defense, because he had a rematch with Liston. And I want to say either this was the next fight or the fight after that, in which he fought Terrell. And, everybody thought that was going to be a good match because he was a young guy, had good punching power, came up through the Chicago boxing circuit as an amateur. So, New York City and Chicago were considered and Detroit were considered like the meccas of boxing. Ali was definitely an anomaly coming from Louisville, Kentucky. So, they thought it'd be a good fight. Well, Mr. Terrell decided he wanted to try to get in Muhammad Ali's head. And so he wouldn't call him Muhammad Ali. He would always refer to him as Cassius Clay. And there was the classic confrontation. Of course, Howard Cosell was the instigator because he was the reporter. And Howard asked Terrell, why don't you call him Muhammad Ali? Which Muhammad Ali came back and said, that's right. My name's Ali, Muhammad Ali. Say my name. And Terrell looked at Cosell and said, his mama named him Clay. I'm going to call him Clay. So if you saw the movie Ali, if you haven't seen the actual fight on tape, if you've seen the movie Ali, they depicted that fight because that was a moment, not only in sports, but in the culture. And Muhammad Ali said afterwards that he deliberately wanted to beat this guy up. He did not want to knock him out. He wanted to punish him. And every time Ali got a clean shot in and looked like he hurt Terrell, he would ask the question, what's my name? And later on in the fight, he was like, say my name, right? Now, I don't know if Terrell ever did during that fight, but the message was sent. It's like, you're not going to disrespect me like that. If you are, you're going to have to back that up. And clearly, Mr. Terrell was not in the position, talent-wise or otherwise, to back that up. And Muhammad Ali won the fight. So I think that's what Josh Hokett's got to go through. I think he needs to have an Ernie Terrell moment. I think now the last 2 or 3 guys he beat were black folks. So I don't know. I've been telling, I know John Jones is kind of like in the doghouse. He might actually be retired for real. But, if I was Dana White, I would have called John Jones, who's considered one of the greatest UFC fighters ever, and say, hey, man, I need you to fight Josh Hokett. I want you to see, 1, we want to see if he's legit because he's undefeated. And 2, I need somebody to kind of put him in his place. Because even Dana White said afterwards that was uncalled for, right? And one of the biggest promoters of UFC in the podcast world, the guy that's over Barstool Sports, he condemned it as well. Now, the White House did not. I guess they were too busy trying to get their lawsuit together against the folks in Evanston. But they haven't or covered their tracks for the farce of a war that they conducted against Iran. But they haven't said anything other than, oh, it was a great event. Did you see the planes flying over? Which was kind of a cool highlight. I have to admit that cost us a lot of taxpayer money for that. But it was kind of a cool visual to see those jets flying over the White House. I would have to admit that. But that's all the White House would talk about. They weren't talking about what this guy, they wouldn't condemn what Josh said. So if I was Dana, I'd call John Jones out of retirement and say, hey, man, might need you to give him the Ernie Terrell treatment. kind of bring him down a notch. You know, that's what's going to have to take. It's just going to have to be somebody in the ring. You know, the next fighter should have like, you know, Michelle Obama on his trunks or whatever. You know, the name Michelle Obama on his trunks, and just beat his brains out. I mean, that's the only way he's going to learn any kind of humility, anything, you know, because Michelle can't do it, you know, even though she was an athlete, you know, she's a woman and she's not going to fight that guy. But somebody just needs to give him the Ernie Terrell treatment and just whip his butt and just bring him down to earth. Because his biggest problem is hubris. He's undefeated. I think he was a pro football player at one time. And so he didn't stick with pro football. So he went into mixed martial arts, which is fine. You know, if he wasn't an asshole, everybody would be celebrating the fact that he was 10-0. But because he is an asshole, we're talking about that. So I don't watch a lot of UFC fights, but I will watch the highlights if they say he lost. I'll be happy about that. Because there's some people that deserve that. If you don't have enough class and respect for humanity, we talked about that in Justin's interview, you know, dignity and humanity. If you don't understand that concept, you know, you're going to have problems. You're going to have like people like me talk about you, and you may get somebody to step in the ring and show you some, you know, humility. So, you know, we'll see. I just think, you know, again, for these people that's on the fence and think that there's something redeemable about a lot of these people, it's not. I think if people really understood, because a lot of folks don't get it, if people really understood that the concept of this nation was that it was to be created not from some kind of divine right, like a kingdom or anything like that. It was an idea that people can govern themselves. They don't need to be ruled over. They can govern themselves. They don't need to be controlled by a religion. They can govern themselves. You know, I don't know why in human history there's always that flaw that it seems like, well, we just gotta strong arm people to do what we want them to do. No, you have to educate. If you want to strong arm people, educate them. Give them the full scope. Give them every avenue and resource available. Make it so that they can learn at home and learn in the classroom, right? You gotta do better. It's just, you know, the only way we can stop authoritarianism and all that stuff is people have to be educated. If you educate the masses will not be controlled, right? So, you know, I just don't understand people who still think that it's a both sides conversation. It's not for rational, educated people. And you don't have to have an Ivy League degree to be educated. You don't even have to have a college degree to be educated, right? Just common sense would tell you that this is not a both sides issue. If you're a decent person that believes in the dignity and humanity of human beings, it's not a both sides issue. You got folks that don't give a damn about people, and then you got us, the people. And we've got to stop buying their bullshit and put them in positions of power. If I've said this before on the podcast, if there's a guy that is against the government running for a government office, do not vote for them. If they're saying, I want to destroy the government, and they're applying for a government job, don't hire them. Because if you bring them in, they're going to try to destroy the government. Project 2025 is the guidebook to destroy the government. and people voted for the guy that was following the guidebook. We just got to stop that. You know what I'm saying? If you're running for office and you're against the government, then just know that if everybody else votes for you, I won't. Because I don't think you should be in a job that you're trying to destroy. Nobody would hire somebody in their company if they say, I'm going to rob it at the interview, or I'm going to burn the building down. They won't hire that person. So why do we elect people who say they want to destroy the government? Now, if you want to change government, okay. If you want to make it more responsive to people, okay. But these folks are, we got to tear it down and all this stuff. And the only reason why they're mad is because white people ain't the only ones benefiting from it. That's it. When they see somebody who looks like me, somebody from other ethnic cultures other than white benefiting from government, they're angry. And they want to tear it all down. They'd rather tear down. They'd rather cancel an election. They'd rather have an insurrection than allow a government of the people, by the people, and for the people to stand. That's where they are. And so anybody that's against that concept, anybody that keeps talking about this Christian national, all this stuff, stop that. Stop voting for these people. Vote for people that give a damn about us, that want to exhibit some real American leadership and make decisions and policies to take this country to the next level. People that understand the humanity of other humans. Vote for them. Stop voting for these slick talking comments. One of the rules I used to have in the jail, and I'll let y'all go on this. One of the rules I used to have in the jail is that you need to talk slow, clear, and loud. Because if you got an inmate that's talking really, really fast, they trying to get over on you. If you're talking to somebody that's like, you hear them yelling from one end of the pod to the other, but then when you ask them a question, they start mumbling. No. I need to understand what you're saying. I need you to take your time and say it, right? And I need you to be loud when you say it. Loud enough for me to hear it. That was just a rule. Because I knew, especially the ones that were talking slick, they get to talking real fast about it. Probably say, "No, bro, you talking too fast. I'm gonna move on." Because whatever you trying to get over on me, I ain't got time. Right? So stop listening, stop getting caught up with these slick talking folks. You want plain talking people. Why do you think Graham Plattner is doing well in Maine? Because he's talking plain. People saying, well, he's not really working class and he's got all these issues with women, blah, blah, this and that. We literally have a rapist in the White House, a felon in the White House right now. Think the standards are gone. Now, if we want to bring them back, I feel you, but you can't use that as an argument right this minute. You can't. So, let's do better, y'all. Let's stop giving people like Josh and his ilk a platform, or just relegate them to the minority of society, right? And when I say that, it's like, you stay in your lane. You're a good fighter, just fight. If your educated guess is that a former first lady is a man, we don't need to hear your political commentary. You can talk to your friends, but you don't need to be on a national platform, if that's what you believe. That's just me. If you believe the earth is flat, I don't need you in public office. I just don't. Ain't got time. Or any other crazy thing that's out there, right? Ain't got time. Well, you can be free to move about the country, as they say at Southwest. You know what I'm saying? But I don't want you in leadership. I don't want to see you on a national platform. And we got to start treating them like that. And that's the only way we're going to move this country forward. We got to get to the point where we're committed and educated enough to just vote for people who give a damn about other people. All right, guys, that's all I got. Thank y'all for listening. Until next time.
NBG Podcast Network.